Sup guys? Implacable's been out for a while now, so I've had some time to really test her out and get a better idea about her strengths and weaknesses. This might be a controversial statement, but she does have weaknesses and is not the best carrier for every situation, just because she has a root. One obvious case is when the enemy is not moving, which was the case with Arizona meta, where her lack of damage was very apparent. One particular comparison I was interested in was with Arc Royal. I wanted to know if Implacable's extra slow strength would be able to overcome her lower damage on paper against heavy armor enemies, and it just so happens that the Arbiter for the current month is the heavy armor one. I used the fleet with a relatively consistent vanguard that puts the emphasis of the damage on the main fleet. Aside from Arc and Implacable, everything was kept constant between the two fleets, even the launch time of the carriers. I chose to use Azur as the tank, whose slow stacks with arcs up to 80%. You could say that this makes the fleet structure more rigid, and that Implacable would allow for more flexibility in the vanguard since you don't need the extra slow. But in high level fights, such as these, you still need to bring Azur in order to survive. In theory, you could try tanking with someone like Cheshire instead of Azur, making use of Implacable's evasion buff. Then Cheshire would be able to clear out enemy planes and allow your carriers to stay hidden. I did try this, but it wasn't worth it because the planes and suicide ships were still getting through, and Cheshire was obviously less tanky than Azur, so it just resulted in less overall damage and consistency. There just aren't really options that can tank as reliably as Azur while also dealing more damage. You could try replacing her with another large cruiser, but they're less tanky and the extra damage is not really noticeable, especially in this fight. And Drake is not really an option here because the boss has shields. Let's say we get a new ship that is as tankier as Azur, but brings a lot more damage, and she doesn't have a slow. Then Implacable's flexibility would become more relevant. There are a few areas subject to RNG within the tests. So this includes the time at which the carriers are spotted, and the Vanguard could die prematurely, and Arc could proc her assault carrier skill more times than expected. But all of these should be taken care of with large enough sample sizes, and both fleets are subject to the same RNG. And now let's get into the results. The very first thing to note is that the average remaining HP between the two are virtually the same at 26 bars. As expected, using Implacable results in higher consistency. The extra slow also helps Shinano and Haku both deal extra damage, and unsurprisingly, Implacable's average damage is lower than Arc's, but much more consistent. One thing that was slightly unexpected was that Haku's variance was higher with Implacable than with Arc, but not by much. The highest damage dealt in a single fight was with Arc, where she procced her assault carrier 3 times, while the lowest was Implacable but not by much. Another metric that could be useful is counting the number of times that each fleet dealt more damage than a certain threshold. For example, let's assume that your submarines can do 15 bars of damage, then you would be more likely to one-shot the boss with the Arc fleet. On the other hand, if you are fighting a similar boss with 75% HP of this one, then you would see better results using Implacable. From these numbers, you can see that Arc does high roll and low roll more than Implacable, which is to be expected, but the difference is not very significant. I also tried using Chkolov to see if this boss just doesn't move enough for slows to matter, but clearly the damage drops off significantly despite still having Azur in the fleet. So 60% slow is definitely not enough. I didn't bother finishing this set because it was clearly not going to be competitive. It might look like Chkolov is doing more than the other two, but that's because she is launching first, so she's stealing some of the damage that is being dealt to the 2 ads being spawned by the boss. In conclusion, when it comes to heavy armor, I'd say that even if the enemy moves, you're not going to see much of a difference between using Implacable or using Arc combined with Azur. Against light and medium armor, her competition is not as strong, but you really have to consider whether you need a root or not in the first place. While she is definitely very good at what she does, she's not exactly always the best option, regardless of the situation. I've seen some comparisons between her and Vanguard, in that they're both supports as opposed to being the main damage dealer in the fleet, but she's definitely no Vanguard, because a guaranteed damage increase is literally always useful, while a root might not be. If anything, Shinano is probably closer to Vanguard with all the damage buffs she provides, and I think that Shinano remains the best carrier in the game, although Implacable is not far off. I know some people are probably going to be triggered by this video for one reason or another, so let's take a step back and remember what we're playing. It's really not that serious, guys. Anyways, that's pretty much it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and see you in the next one.